Hello, welcome to this week's edition of Small Talk. My name's Andy, I'm a Methodist minister in the Basingstoke Reading Circuit. Earlier today I was having my lunch and watching the news. I was reminded of the elections taking place in the United States of America. I don't claim to know very much about American politics, but it seemed that the two candidates and the two parties seem further apart than ever before. Also on the news was the report of the shootings in Vienna yesterday and an update on the tensions between different religious communities in France following the shootings there in the community. Even in our own country, differences seem to have been emphasised by the different lockdown situations different parts of the country have been in. Are you in a Tier 1, Tier 2 or Tier 3 area? Are you in the north or the south? It seemed that there were accusations that different communities were being treated differently. In amongst all of this, there have been moments of togetherness. The clapping for carers on a Thursday evening seemed to bring all sorts of different communities together. Supporting people like Captain Tom doing his sponsored walking around the garden similarly seemed to bring people together. If we read in the New Testament and in the Gospels, Jesus too was someone who sought to overcome divisions, seemed to want to reach out across boundaries and bring people together. He didn't observe some of the boundaries that the people and the culture of his day demanded. He crossed religious boundaries, reaching out to the Samaritan, the Greek, the Jew, the Gentile. He reached out across the boundaries of economics, talking to a beggar on the street and also the rich young ruler, speaking to those who were untouchable or outcast or deemed unclean, the leper, the woman who was bleeding, the tax collector who he chose to eat with. As we approach this coming weekend and Remembrance Sunday and next week Armistice Day itself, there is the temptation for those things that have divided us in the past to be emphasised, and maybe even for us to take sides, even for us to claim that God is on our side. On Remembrance Sunday, I'm often reminded of a story that I once heard being told as part of a Remembrance Day service. I'd like to share it with you. It's the story of how a group of young servicemen were fleeing through France, carrying the body of a recently killed member of their troop with them. They approached the outskirts of a village in rural France, found the church door and called on the young pastor inside, asking for his permission to bury their friend in the graveyard of the church. Much to their distress, the young pastor declined because it was obvious to him that the person who'd died was of a different denomination to the church that he was the minister of. But he relented and said that they could bury him just beyond the wall of the church graveyard, which the friends duly did, promising themselves at the time that at some point in the future they would come back and pay respect to their lost friend. Decades later, when they were able to do so, the group of friends fulfilled their pledge and undertook a pilgrimage back to the village in France where they'd buried their comrade. But when they found the church, they searched and searched for the grave of the friend that they'd buried many, many years ago, but without any success. As they were about to give up and return home, the door of the church opened and an elderly rector came out and asked them what they were doing. And they shared their story. It turned out that that young pastor was the elderly rector still serving in that community. And he explained to them that they wouldn't find the grave of their loved one beyond the church walls, because after they'd gone and in the years that had followed, he'd felt so uncomfortable that this child of God who had died had been somehow excluded from being enveloped in the love and care of the church, and metaphorically, in the boundaries of God's love. "Oh," said the group of friends, "so did you exhume the body and rebury him somewhere within the churchyard?" "No," the rector explained. "Rather than doing that, instead we knocked down the wall, the boundary that the church had originally put up, and expanded it so that it encompassed the grave of your loved friend." He took them to the grave and they were able to pay their respects within the churchyard. That very simple story, I can't even remember whether it's a true story or one that was just told. I can't remember its origins, but it speaks to me and challenges me. Whenever I think that someone is beyond the reach of the church or beyond God's love, I'm challenged and I hear Jesus saying to me, but I need you to knock down that wall, that line that you've drawn, and widen it a little further. Because no one is beyond the love that I have. The love that I have to share is immeasurable and unconditional. It's freely offered, it's freely given. So as we think about all these divisions in our societies, in the States, in Europe, even within our own communities, let's not be tempted to build walls or draw lines and say these people are within God's embrace and those are not, because God's arms are wide enough and God's love is big enough to embrace us all.